Okay, here goes nothing. Hey, we're live. Hi, I'm Luke Imhoff, and we do have chat.
Okay. Okay. So I'm Keith. Some of you may from a rigor group. For a long time. Can y'all read this? This is like anybody at home can probably read. Probably goes on the screen. Let's see if I can change my mind.
Right over there, typeface.
Unless we do screen share, I don't think we're ever going to get to a point where people can read the screen at home.
Yeah, I mean, a little.
Unless you have an easy invert thing, it's probably not going to be easy to do.
All right, well, sorry for those of you who are following along. All right, so we're talking about GraphQL tonight. Has everybody heard of that? Done anything with it? Who's heard of it? Raise your hand. Who's deployed a GraphQL endpoint?
Oh wait, no, I can make GraphQL. I have.
Okay, even if it was on your local host, like it's done anything with anybody? Okay. All right, so GraphQL is a kind of a replacement for REST. Depending on who you talk to, that may be a controversial statement. So REST for over a decade now has been promising us the moon. Like, you can do all these things, and the whole hypermedia promise of the original REST paper, which was my PhD dissertation, was that you would be able to get to an endpoint and then crawl to all possible resources from that endpoint, because REST can give you pointers to or links to other documents, and because the nature of the web is a document-oriented network, it was also supposed to be granted. Unfortunately, the possibility may still be there. I've never seen tooling that came even close to delivering on the possibilities of REST. And so years ago, I kind of gave up on that notion of that it was ever going to be cool. So GraphQL comes along a few years ago. I was pretty skeptical of it for a long time. The notion of giving, possibly untrusted clients the ability to create an arbitrary query that could be potentially deeply nested and or costly just seemed like a really bad idea to me. Fast forward a couple of years, I spent the better part of the summer creating like a networking CQRS stack where it's supposed to be beautiful, everything was all on commands, went upstream, and then the results of those came back down over an asynchronous WebSocket, and it was all going to be awesome and unicorns, farting rainbows, and all that kind of stuff. About halfway through the summer, it already did everything that I kind of wanted to in a way that was much better than what I was coming up with, which I think is kind of a trope in the programming world, is that whatever you come up with is going to have a shittier version of Lisp in it eventually. And this is no exception.
I think I reinvented a bunch of pre-built Java Swing libraries just because I didn't read the standard library first to know it already existed.
Yeah, I've done that kind of stuff too. There's a lot to be said for looking for prior art. and looking well enough that you're actually going to find it. That said, I mean, GraphQL was fairly new on the scene at the time. When I started messing around with it, it didn't have support for subscriptions, which is a third cool thing that gets added to the early stages of queries and mutations. So without further ado, let's look at some GraphQL examples here. I'd like this to be smaller, but it's not difficult. Fortunately, these documents are almost all pretty short. So what we've got here, this is the Absinthe tutorial repo. There's nothing special about it. I mean, it's done with Absinthe and all, but I haven't really done anything to customize this, so you can go look at that repo for most of the code that I'll show today. So down here is, let me just give you the orientation from the top down, all right? So.
Oh, wait.
Yeah.
You didn't accept Absinthe.
Okay, so Absinthe is the Phoenix or the Elixir, one of the Elixir-based libraries for implementing GraphQL. It is by far the most complete in the Elixir world. There was another one that I don't think anybody's really pushed anything to in quite a while. Phoenix offers a lot more facilities. It's used in production in a lot of places. I've deployed it in production in 3 or 4 apps. The guys that drive that, Ben and Bruce, are super smart and really dedicated to having a good library for GraphQL and Elixir.
They're having a training at ElixirConf. It's a 2-day training if you want to sign up.
Yeah, highly recommended. They're both really good to talk to, and good kind of teachers, leaders. So I think you'll get a lot out of it. Is anybody going to ElixirConf? Plus, all right, so I'm going to give you a brief kind of rundown of what GraphQL looks like and how it works before we jump over to the Absinthe side of things. So what we're looking at here is something called Graphical. It's maintained, I think, by the Apollo Stack guys. And it's basically just a browser-based interface for building your GraphQL queries. I use it fairly frequently, just kind of as an IDE for GraphQL needs. They do have some standalone versions of it. People have wrapped it up into Electron or different. There's a version of it built into the Apollo DevTools. It's pretty handy because you can go just look at your queries. If you're using React, you can go have a look at the queries that have been run and then just hit a button and it jumps over to the graphical interface that's built into that with the query and parameters are already kind of filled in for you. So it's a nice development experience. But if you're just playing around, like graphical works by itself, just works great. It's built into Absinthe. There's a plug you can add that sticks on into your app with very little effort. So I'll show you how to do that. So running down these parameters here, name is just whatever I'm calling this tab. You can have several queries and things like that open. Doesn't matter for these purposes. URL is going to be GraphQL endpoint. So has anybody ever done SOAP or looked at SOAP or messed with it? Yeah? Okay. So in the SOAP world, you had like an endpoint that everything got sent to. REST kind of blew that apart, and everyone knows there's billions of endpoints that you're making requests to. GraphQL brings it back full circle, and there's one endpoint that you submit your documents to your requests. Hey, what's up, guys? Hey. Yeah, and then the WebSocket URL is for subscriptions. If you want to get async subscriptions, WebSocket supported as well as long polling because it goes over Phoenix socket, a website, so or channel. It's the terminal socket, right? For the
overall
for the
thing is
transfer.
a socket, and then there's channels inside of it.
Yeah. So the Absinthe operates its own channel abstraction to actually move the data back and forth. Yeah, so you can also add headers. There's some standard, you want to add a no-op bearer token, or if you've got other custom headers that you've used recently. You've got them access them right here.
Is that whole section new, or is it just usually collapsed? Because I don't remember seeing it before.
What whole section?
The whole name URL and header part. Like I always remember that GraphQL and the run button being the top of the interface before.
I mean, I've seen it evolve a little bit. Like the headers stuff is a little nicer than it used to be.
Okay.
The tab interface is newer.
Okay.
Used to be just one tab.
Oh, maybe that's
one
what.
thing, and you say you have the option of adding, multiple things. But
Are those all a function of the back-end content types and everything else, the categories and there?
Because these tabs you're seeing here are not. Those are tabs I came up with before.
Okay.
But as you'll see, when we're actually typing in our queries, you do have this. So there's this nice little interface here. Here, so our documents, GraphQL schemas are self-documents, and there's a really funky query you can run here that will tell you everything that the server supports. Don't bother memorizing it; it's not going to be on the test.
Oh my god, that uptype one is awesome. How do they know how deep to go?
Yeah, I'm not sure it's not just an arbitrary decision.
Oh, okay.
So like if you have a really deeply nested schema, you may not be able to get to the bottom of it using that particular query.
Oh, okay.
I'm not sure what to do in that case. But especially if you use an Absinthe or a similar kind of toolkit, you have the ability to kind of decorate your schema with additional documentation about what this field does, or what it represents, right? So
for Absinthe, when you have the docs that show up in GraphQL, do they also generate like XDoc docs, or do you have to duplicate those? Okay.
Yeah, I've done that. I can't remember if I had to add a package for it. I feel like it's built into Absinthe, but I can't swear to it.
Okay.
But you can generate that, right? So it's worth talking a little bit about some terminology within GraphQL. So as the name kind of indicates, it's a graph explorer, it's a graph language. So graph has nodes and edges built into it, right? In GraphQL, what we talk about is a root document, right? And that's basically this area you see here, like all the stuff that I'm sticking in my query, or the actual query itself rather than the parameters. And if you look over here in the documentation, read that, you see like, and on the root of the schema, you'll have query, mutation, and subscription, which are denoted by types. So another thing about GraphQL is that it's a strongly typed query language. And so our root query type is basically the type that includes all query type is basically the type that includes all of the fields that we are queryable within that. If we want to just run a read-only query or something, it just pulls readable data back. And then each of the fields within a given type also has its own type, right? So if we dig into the root query type, we see posts and user, and posts is a list of posts. Go figure. we dig into post, we can start seeing additional data about what constitutes a post. We've got an author, which again is a reference to a different data type or a user. You can go look at that. You've got a list of contacts, of ID, name, and posts that a user's written. Looking back at the post itself, we've also got body and ID, published at, and title. And then the second field we see here is user, and user is a little bit different because it requires a parameter. So we don't have a query on here that allows you to get all users, so that's easy to do. This one requires you to specify which user you want.
Does GraphQL support a map type where the keys aren't fields and they're not known ahead of time, or do you have? So instead you do it like how a vacuum map would be, where you do a list of entries with like a key and value, or no?
Yeah. Okay. Use a list of key value lists.
Okay.
So now I say GraphQL doesn't support that. It is possible to do that, but you lose the typing information in that. You have to use what's a custom scalar to do that, and you can specify the encoding for that, and when you're encoding, you just hand back a map, and then it's going to get serialized out to JSON that way when it goes down the wire. But you're not able to like dig within that field. All you're going to do is get an opaque object on the client side.
Okay, so you could use custom scalar if there's some format you need to pass through that you don't want to.
Yeah, for example, like serializing time. Maybe you want to use Unix epoch for that rather than an ISO date string. Okay. So you have different options, and you can customize it any way you want to. If you want to customize it, it's like Tuesday, May 14th, you can do that too. The catch is you usually want to specify how to deserialize something, so you need to make a type in an unusual way, is because you've got something you want to deserialize about it that's relevant.
So you said ISO time. Does that mean there's like more specific than string of like this is a string of this format, or is like time specifically called out in the GraphQL standard? We're going to use ISO.
No, time is not out. Okay, time is specified in the GraphQL standard. It's just a common example of something you'll end up creating a new scalar for.
Okay.
Like JavaScript, it doesn't really specify time, which is in my mind like gigantic freaking oversight. But I don't write the spec, so and I'm not sure I would be that much good at it. There would be a lot of other things that were just screwed up. So when we're looking at our query, we talked a little. We talked a little bit about the different types that are available to you, starting from your root type. Mutations are things that modify a server state. Queries aren't supposed to do that. As far as I know, there is not a hard and fast preventive measure that keeps you from doing that. You can do it, it's just not a good idea. Side effects in general from query are not a good idea. But if we look at our root mutation type here, we'll see the different fields that, and even mutations are called fields in GraphQL nomenclature. We've got create post, which takes a number of parameters and returns a post document. I'll show you that in a second. Similarly, we've got create user with same kind of thing. Now, what's interesting here? So in create post, we're talking about naive date, date time scale, but this is an example of one where they created a scalar transformation. We can go look at that in the schema. And then down here on user, we've got contact input. So you have these things called input types, which allow you to specify exactly the shape of an object that you're going to use in a mutation. So if you have something that's kind of a complicated nest of properties that you want to make sure are all bundled together, and you want to have some type safety around that, create an input type rather than just specifying them as individual parameters where you might actually leave them out, get better feedback from the server about what you left out if you use the input types. That said, they're kind of a pain because you can't reuse an object type as an input type. You have to duplicate the specification of it. I don't know if there's any plans to change that, but it's annoying. Though a lot of times your input type bears only a passing resemblance to your object type. So maybe it's better that they don't tie them together or that you tie them together, but I have on more than one occasion written out like 10 or 15 different object types and then duplicated that exact same specification with the input types for those to save something like that.
I would guess the reason to make them different is like from the caller's perspective, like the tense might change or like the part of speech might change, but otherwise it'd almost be the same because they're just nouns.
Yeah, I don't really know. Like there's a better reason for it than I'm thinking of right now. But, I'm sure it is.
The type system Facebook is using did not like it when they reused it.
Awesome.
The root query type.
Yes.
In the root query type, is that the fields come from different endpoints, or is it only just you're defining the model?
Yeah, so all the fields in this case come from the same endpoint. There's a thing you're starting to see in some GraphQL servers called schema stitching, where you have like kind of a load balancer type application server, if you will, that itself delegates out to different GraphQL endpoints within, say, your enterprise. That's starting to become a more common pattern. Apollo has a server that is intended to be kind of a load balancer, query cache, be all end all kind of thing that sits in front of your GraphQL servers, and it's intended to use. The intention is to use schema stitching with that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how I feel about all that. Some days I think it's a great idea. Some days I think it's not. You know, schema stitching I think is fine. That in particular I think makes sense. Especially when you look at like microservices and things like that, where you might want to use GraphQL and have a very focused set of fields that are combined with the same thing from other microservices, and you just want to service those as one endpoint.
What does it error out when one of the API is down or something? If it has the same model with, same model having different attributes with different APIs connecting in the backend.
Yeah, so you have to specify in the schema on your server that it would be like adding a notation that this part of the schema is going to come from this endpoint, and then when it starts up, I think it would go out there, request the documents, and make sure it all still meshes. But I mean, you end up. There's a certain degree of coupling that's going to happen there, and how there's any way to avoid that safely.
Wouldn't you kind of want it? Because otherwise you end up, each service ends up, instead of create user, it's create microservice user, but then you're exposing that the user's coming from microservice. So you almost want the stitcher.
Most of the implementations I've seen allow you to namespace that kind of stuff, so you can say like, I want to suck in everything from this server, but I don't put foo from it, right?
I'd almost think you wouldn't want the foo, because then if you decide to break it up in a different way, you're stuck with the foo namespace, even though it doesn't map to the service name anymore.
Yeah, think about smaller grained objects and something like user, right? So that's fairly basic. That's probably going to be germane to pretty much everything, or like an actor kind of thing. But if your billing service is different from your say marketing service, then you probably wouldn't be able to say create billing user versus create email user. And you can, even with the namespacing, you can still have the ability to break that out later on into another component service, or break it out of your monolith and move it to a microservice, something like that. So I find the danger comes more from not overspecifying. Things can be overspecified. It's riskier to underspecify, right? So the namespacing is not something I have a ton of concern about, or we're going to implement something like this.
Do the stitchers, when they're loading the data, automatically check for collisions, or does someone have to hit the endpoint for the collision to like at
Depends on the
runtime?
implementation.
Okay.
Strongly typed, static type implementations probably check it at all time.
Okay.
Something that lets anything go, like in Ruby, I don't know what they do. Like they may well parse that stuff out at runtime. The first time you hit GraphQL endpoint, and then not after that, or it's just going to depend on the library implementation.
Okay.
It's not implemented, as far as I know, it's not implemented in Absinthe yet.
Okay.
And so I don't have any guidance on whether that's going to stay the case or not. I mean, I do know they plan on implementing schema stitching in Absinthe, so I don't know what the format is going to look like.
Does Absinthe have support, sort of like how the Phoenix router, you can route to another router? Can you do that sort of thing in Absinthe where you could have a library that has a subset of the namespace and you route to part of it to like forward so you don't have it all in one file?
Yes.
Okay.
If I understand what you're at, you can break apart a schema and,
Yeah.
and import parts of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can do that. And it's in this example project, so I'll show you how to do that in a second. Any other questions? Some good ones. All right.
When you mentioned under-specifying, what you mean like not providing enough potential fields you might query for in the future, and then you have to modify your schema in the future?
More like in that context, I was talking about not fully specifying the namespace or allowing language from one domain to bleed over into the global domain so that everybody got with it. Whereas, so think like a user, for example. A user to your authentication system is very different than a user to your billing system, right? A lot of times they're tied together, but think about like a product who
Subscriptions, billing,
subscription on behalf of
versus actual user. Yeah.
right. If you just call those users, and this is a bit of a contrived example because everybody wrestles with this kind of thing in a different way. But if we just call them users, then you're kind of stuck loading all the concepts that might touch a user into this God object, or having to come up with some other abstraction to represent an account or something like that for the billing system.
Yeah.
I think my answer to just about anything in the field of programming is it depends. It's going to depend very much on the use case of system you're building, so what's appropriate. Just then I was talking specifically about naming conventions and the namespacing of your naming conventions and the namespacing of different things. So, when you look at like Phoenix contexts, anybody wrestle with those things? Used them much. So it's a source of much wailing and gnashing of teeth over the last couple of years in the Phoenix community, but it's really not that complicated. Like our meeting last month was about last month.
It did, and the recording worked, so you can actually watch it. I did post it on the Twitter. I can put it on the. I don't think I put it on the meetup though, so I can post it there.
Yeah, I mean it was more of a discussion than anything else about what makes good context. But the gist of it is that people tend to overcomplicate them, and
Well, it's just domain modeling.
yeah, exactly. A lot of people aren't familiar with real domain modeling, believe it or not. We've been doing CRUD applications for so long that understanding what actually a boundary is difficult. It's a difficult thing to kind of verbalize, and it's a difficult thing to kind of like give somebody the feel for it in very black and white terms. One reason I really like GraphQL, especially Absinthe implementation of it, is that it allows you to peel off stuff into different contexts and then stitch that stuff together at the boundary of your system rather than deeply within the core of your application. So rather than introducing a dependency between, say, the billing system and the accounting system, or the billing system and the warehouse system, I can tie those together at the boundary and then make sure that in the application code, those things are nice and clean, the boundary is well defined, and not, I'm not referring to, I'm not associating models or schemas across different contexts and then creating headaches for myself at test time.
So when you have multiple contexts and you're doing Absinthe, do you write the fields in the schema for each context in like that OTP app? Or do you have it like Phoenix Web where like the Absinthe layer is the top layer, so like it stitches together all the other OTP apps, and the like Absinthe part is only in one OTP app?
Yeah, that's the way I think is the right way to do it. I've done it a number of different ways, different apps. The one I'm most happy with right now is that, you know, it was an app that was started more recently than the ones I've worked on. But the web, you know, part of the application includes the schema, the GraphQL schema, and resolvers. The resolvers talk to context module interfaces. Yeah, it's pretty good. Sometimes we'll introduce a second layer between the resolvers and the domain, because the notion is something that is actually cross-domain. And so what you need there is like an integration context, or
Because the resolver would get too much code integrating the two, so you
well,
don't
you
really
end,
want
up
to.
having, you end up having to tie contexts that don't require being coupled together, because you don't have a layer that does couple them for your resolver to talk to. We'll talk more about that in a few minutes.
Okay.
We'll get into the Absinthe code, the Elixir code. But, there's a lot of ways we can skin that cat. So anyway, you can do something like, wait, I'm jumping ahead, sorry. These are mutations. We talked a little bit about those. And then finally, we've got subscriptions, which are a relatively new concept, but it's, think of it as an asynchronous connection that sends you document responses that come from other people's mutations or from other mutations, right? And so when I hit a mutation, that can automatically trigger a subscription to get fulfilled. And because of the way we set things up, it knows how to go and query that, you know, it can either there's ways to do it out of band and trigger the subscription. A few different possibilities, but the net result is that I'm able to get new data coming in without having to, you know, fetch it from the server in a synchronous manner or polling orders.
Another form of observer, some way.
I mean,
Obviously,
yeah, you could, yeah, it's in a server kind of.
Yeah.
It's a messaging system.
Yeah.
So you're just receiving a message where the document contains data.
Does the spec for subscriptions or the Absinthe implementation have the option of whether you see events that are triggered by your own mutation? So like you'd only see other people's, so that like kind of like in a chat system that you don't see your own message pop back, but you see everyone else's message come back, you know, that sort of thing?
Yeah, that's handled in middleware.
Okay.
So the spec doesn't have anything like that. The
Okay.
spec is pretty high level, as far as I know. I'm not an expert on the spec. I've read it a couple of times, but not deeply. And I certainly don't write it. But Absinthe has a note, and most GraphQL toolkits are going to have a notion of middleware.
Mhm.
And you can use that to authorize or not authorize the delivery of certain fields. So like I can take a mutation that triggers, say, creation of a post,
Mhm.
and then when that subscription gets fulfilled, I put middleware on certain fields of the data in that subscription, and if the user associated with the connection is not privileged enough, they don't get to see, say, the author of the post or the comments. Or I really wish we had a better domain to talk about than blogs, but it's the go-to for everybody. So does that make sense? Well, okay.
So constraints on the response, practically.
Yeah, you can think of it so that you can do middleware before, you can do it after. Before is good for, you know, blocking something like you just don't have permission to ask for anything. If you want to like introspect the document being requested, you could do something like that. If you had a document that was like super costly to fulfill, like say I've got a resolver that actually fetches something from the web, and I don't want to spend the 2 seconds worth of latency to do that if they don't have permissions to be requesting web resources. I can block that at the outset, or I can go ahead and fetch it, but I know that not everybody's allowed to see the time I fetched it, so I can put an afterware on there to block out things after the fetch. So you've got a lot of flexibility in how and when you do those things. Middleware is also used to implement things like batching, where think about a query. So this is a good example.
Perhaps lazy loading like 10 articles at a time? Or?
It's not lazy loading. It's more like, all right, so so here's a good example, right? I'm asking for posts. Now this returns a list of posts. Maybe that list is 1,000 entries long, right? Pagination is not a topic I'm going to get into just yet, but really at all. But author is a user, right? And so there's whenever I request a post, it's going to try to resolve that next part of the document, the author, right? Now, if I've got 1,000 posts and I do it the dumb way, the naive way, that's an N+1 situation, right? So every post is going to require a call to fulfill the user associated with that post, right? Using middleware, you can batch that up so that you've got, when it first gets all the posts, then you can use the first part of the batch resolver to collect all the IDs, and then say in the batch resolver, you say, give me all the authors who have posts with these IDs. You get all that back in a map and hand it back out to the outer function, and then it just plucks things out of the map. So it makes it pretty efficient. So rather than having 1,001 queries, you have 2, plus some map processing where it plugs things back into the outer document. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's like sequential refining of your query.
Yeah, I think the pattern is called data loader. I know Facebook has a library for it. We have a library for it in Absinthe now, or it's in Elixir, but it can be used the same way. It's not a real uncommon thing. Just let you batch up things, and you can also do that with if you're doing things like making web requests, it makes that a whole lot more efficient. You have a way to request 10 documents at once. There's also an async middleware that lets you tell the resolver resolve to async. So fire off a task to go start doing this stuff, and then come back and check it before we send the document. So, which is different from subscriptions. Talk about that if anybody's got questions about it. So let's see what happens when we actually run the query. I didn't fill in my name when I set up my user, so I don't think it's actually fulfilling the author here. So the format that comes back, this is basically what you're going to get if you were to use the a GraphQL client directly. Would be an object that has a data key, and then for each top level field under your query, you're going to have another key under the data.
When you run the query in a Postman or any REST client that you can use instead of the GraphQL,
how would you run it?
Yeah.
So if you're going to run it in something like Postman, I think Postman actually has a GraphQL facility now. But if you're going to run it just like in any query browser, you would it would be a post request, you technically do it as a GET request, but I think the plug by default uses post to this URL.
I had this
Well,
weird.
open DevTools in the network tab will just show what it's doing.
Right, so API is my endpoint. You can see the headers here. Y'all see this okay? All right, so the request headers are the typical kind of like web style head request headers. The request payload is the body of the request, and it's a JavaScript object that has the query, which is a string, submitted as a string, and then the variables that you can also send along with it.
So even a GET request will have a request payload that needs to send when you do a GET to a GraphQL.
So yeah, this is a JSON based payload, but if you were doing it as GraphQL, I mean as a GET request, you would do it just as a query parameter.
And when I tried like in copying a GraphQL query into a Power BI, it eventually ended up like an error because it's trying to, the same URL trying to load the GraphQL editor, which is not giving me the output back.
Oh, that may be because you've got a collision, like GET on the GraphQL.
No, but when I open the query in a browser, it shows me the GraphQL editor and the output as well. And what are the filters and what are the output, it shows me that. But the same query, when I use it as a data source in a Power BI, it freaks out. I mean, it couldn't able to render the output back to me. So I was just thinking, the payload that you said, every query that goes to GraphQL should be a post request with the payload.
Well, you could just use DevTools here and do the copy as curl, and you'd see exactly what to send.
Yeah, I mean, this is configured to use post, and most endpoints are going to be configured to use post for the GraphQL endpoint.
Okay.
You have to, that's a configuration change you have to make to the server source code. So
you can use the same payload with a GET request inside it, and then you can use a postman and hit the query as a GET request or a post request.
yeah, you should be able to.
A GET request, you're going to be forced to put the payload as a URL parameter though,
Right.
and you're going to be limited on the length of that.
Consider if you have a heavy filter, right? I mean,
Yeah, if you have a big query, it may not say that it's a GET.
Yeah, if you got a short one, you can do that.
Yeah.
I don't know of a good reason to do that.
Yeah.
The problem with GET requests is that they're fair game for something to pre-cache for you.
Oh, okay.
And that's not usually what you want.
And the other part I would say is that, remember, part of GraphQL is it's always the same endpoint. So you send queries and mutations to the same endpoint. So mutations need post because otherwise they violate normal HTTP rules of don't let mutations go through GETs because your browser's gonna be a dick and block them.
Yeah.
So like,
You also don't want GETs because your browser is going to cache those responses.
Oh, so it will
yeah.
always be a post request. Exactly.
Yeah.
yeah, like yes, the queries could be GETs, but it's unlikely because it's the same URL for the endpoint, and until it's parsed, it won't know whether to allow a GET or post, which is later than most software decides whether GET or post should be allowed, usually by URL.
Mm-hmm.
That it's likely most implementations, not just Absinthe, will require post to do GraphQL because they might be a mutation.
Again, it's a configuration that you can figure out how to do it. It's just not a great idea.
Oh.
There's as we talked about, there's reasons for that. But it's not, there's nothing that in the GraphQL spec that says that has to be done over HTTPS, right? You can do, there is a transport that uses Phoenix channels as the transport for your queries.
Okay.
And so you don't even do post requests, you're just sending messages up to your Phoenix server and
Okay.
hands it over to Absinthe, and it's really easy to run an Absinthe document. It's not common, but one way if you need to restify a GraphQL endpoint, you can just run the document query from the controller and fill in the blanks where you need
So
to.
over the socket, if you send it, it will be a very small query. Like it won't be like a huge string to send. or like because of the data transmission size that it takes in the socket?
Yeah, I mean, that's not usually where the expense is. Like GraphQL documents don't tend to be very big.
Okay.
Like the query documents or mutations, they response can be pretty big sometimes.
Okay.
Mostly what you would save by using a socket is like some request latency.
Mm-hmm.
There are situations where you might want to do that, but I think that they tend to be less common than otherwise. Um, any other questions about?
So what would be sent would be post with, if it's formatted as JSON, with the query and variables.
Query variables. I think that's it.
Yeah.
That's what it showed.
Yeah.
So it reads a little weird because it's like a JSON key of query within query inside, because GraphQL looks like JSON, but it's not valid JSON. So it just
Yeah. Yeah, when I look, for example, because I'm reading the GraphQL, it has Absinthe, and for example, there's query, and the value is query, and then it looks like a piece of Elixir code that it's going to be interpreted down the road, along with the variables that are added on in order to personalize the request.
Right, and you can embed those directly into the query. Let's see. Here's an example of doing that, where I'm using a mutation. I'm not using query variables here, mostly for some reason. And so I was just creating this. This is mutation. I've got my contact input type here, name and password. Then I want to have my ID returned back to me when the mutation finishes. What I could have done was say, I want to name this query, and I'm going to have
Right.
all right, so now here, one thing about this graphical thing is that it kind of knows what you're allowed to type or what's fair game. So
That's the auto.
It's pretty the autocomplete is pretty solid. Right, so I can submit this. I don't know if it's going to let me or not. Yes, right. So I've got, another Fred Flintstone with ID 2. So that's how you would use the query variables rather than just embedding them directly. And that, of course, is the right way to do it. Like I've never once have I hard coded parameters into my mutations in the client. I'll do that here.
Is there a format for like validation errors coming back? Or I don't want to jump ahead if we're going to get
No, great time. So let's see. That's a echo constraint error. That's not going to work. There was one I hit earlier. I'm trying to remember what it was.
did you enforce minimum length on the body? You could make a really short post. It might trigger it. You do minimum length.
No, what it was a permission error. So I'll undo my change there so you can see what caused that. Let's see. So if I remove my bearer token, don't have that. Post. All right, so if I remove my bearer token, I'm basically not authenticated here, right? So now if I, yeah, here we go. So you get data because it's possible that your error happens like deeply nested in your query or in your mutation structure. So it's still going to try to fulfill everything else above that or similar to that. What we've got here is.
Can you configure that to make it all like all or nothing, or?
On mutations, it's problematic because the parent of the, if you nest your mutation stuff deeply, it's a bad practice to nest mutators within each other because you end up in a distributed transaction kind of scenario where you have complicated logic to roll it back. If you, there's probably a way to do it. I don't know if Tom, it would be scenario dependent, depending on what exactly you're trying to do. But you can, I mean, so when you get a resolver gets a value or is told, hey, go figure out what this is, you get the resolution thus far, so you can say like, oh, well, I see you haven't, you're not authenticated, there's nothing in the context for you, or this field didn't resolve, so I'm not going to give you this one either, right? It's just kind of up to your code as to how you're going to do that. Let's see.
Some group did just release a distributed transaction Saga library.
Yeah, I saw that. It looked good at first glance. Has nothing to do with GraphQL, but it did look like some good language or kind of a DSL around like here are the steps in the transaction and how to roll it back if some part of it fails. That's good. Doesn't really connect any of this stuff.
Well, I can only think if you were doing this as a front across, like we were talking before, where schema stitching and you stitch the mutations together, you potentially would have the distributed transaction just because that's how you're, and so trying to use Saga with Absinthe might work there.
Yeah, I mean, if you were trying to do it, some kind of like automated level, that might be fun to play with, but I tend to think it would be kind of an anti-pattern. It's kind of trying to make your system think too much automatic for yourself. I would rather see somebody, if I was on a team and somebody tried to do that, I would rather see them write a resolver that did the distributed transaction themselves rather than try to automatically wrap something from another system. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. I just don't think it would end well in practice. All right, so you're supposed to see some Elixir. All right. So the Elixir docs are pretty solid, and they walk you through kind of how to set up Elixir or Absinthe within your Phoenix or other Elixir project. A lot of times when somebody asks me these days, like, I don't claim to write Phoenix applications. I pretty much write Absinthe applications. It has taken over so much of my of what I would normally use Phoenix for that I barely scratch the surface of what I could do in Phoenix. Like I have maybe like 3 or 4 REST-ish endpoints, and then the rest of it is all GraphQL stuff. I use the router somewhat. Sockets and channels are used under the covers if you're doing subscription stuff. Things like that. But in terms of controllers and that sort of thing, I really barely even touch those things anymore. So this is kind of replacing that for me. This is our schema module. Just walking through real quick. use Absinthe schema is just something that you'll use at the root of all your schemas. We've got import types here. So this is how you break out a schema into multiple context or areas, and we'll get into these different types here. This does not import fields, but one thing you could do would be like import fields log web dot schema dot account types dot queries, or something like that, where you've actually got most of these fields defined somewhere else as well, and you're importing those. Import types is going to import all of the objects that it finds, all the Absinthe object types it finds in a given module. Import fields will actually import fields with their resolver definitions and all that stuff into some part of your schema. Let's see. So
when you have lists of posts, in the actual file where you define what a post type is, do you actually put the atom post, or is it like auto inferring the name from it's capital P post, so I'm going to say the atom name is post, or do you set that explicitly?
You said that explicitly. So okay. Let's go look at the account types now. Right. So in here, as opposed to the root schema, we use Absinthe.schema.notation. I'm not sure what extra stuff Absinthe schema has in it, to be honest. But there's some small differences, but most of what you get with the notation, you already get through the Absinthe.schema. So these are the different object types. Now these, when they're going out the wire, get converted to camel case from snake case, and there's a way to change that. If you felt strongly that you wanted to have snake cased identifiers going out the wire, you could write a converter that did that instead of the camel case.
Well, I suppose is there a way to do minor changes, kind of like the inflectors where abbreviations like HTML, you don't just want the H lower into the TML, you want to capitalize as an initialism? Yes,
but there's more important things to worry about in the application. My point of view, more important things to worry about. I would not spend my time dealing with that. But so using the serializer support, changing, the thing serializer, you could probably do that. Create some kind of inflector. I'm sure that you could. I just don't know anybody that has.
Okay.
So these are different object types that we're going to have. In this case, they're coming from our accounts. User has all the fields that we talked about. Again, notice that these are snake cased. List of is a, you specify the field, the name, the type. Those are all required fields. The type can be a scalar, a custom scalar you define. It can be one of your other object types. It can be a list of something. I think there's a few others that you can do. But some fields can take arguments, like we talked about that, how you supply an ID to the get user. Did we talk about that? I don't know if we did. So getting a user. So we're supplying the ID to that field here. You can do this anywhere within your document structure, right? So sometimes I'll run into situations where I've got a mutation that, I might need to, let's say I've got a user with a bunch of blog posts, and those blog posts have a category. So I want to see all of Luke's, ElixirConf blog posts, right? I'll use, I pass the two parameters to the top of the query, use one of them in the outer field, and then within the posts, do by category, supply the second field. So you can use those parameters anywhere within the document, but you have to use them somewhere in there because it'll complain if you use it. If you supply a variable that isn't used. It's annoying. It does.
It prevents so many wasted hours of bugs. Like, it's not actually doing anything.
I could not think of a single hour of time that's ever saved. I can think of a lot of time spent taking that kind of crap out just because of complaint.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh.
But to each his own.
One question about is like aggregate fields. Like some of what I struggle with, and I'm just trying to get my feet wet with GraphQL is map it from like SQL, where I'm used to being able to do group bys and mins and maxes and sums and things like that. And I don't see how you could get anything equivalent to that in GraphQL. I assume the workaround is to like create an aggregate type that represents that aggregation.
Yeah. So you end up creating, like I did that to the application I maintained for the last few years. It was on voting. And the way I handled reporting in GraphQL was like the query started off with a votable thing, and then I had a resolver that gave me stats for it, and those stats were the aggregate statistics, like total score, minimum, average, etc.
It seemed like the query examples we see here are like the equivalent of an equal query, like ID equals 1. Do you also have things like greater than or less than?
So that's all dependent on your resolver. You can write your resolvers to take whatever kind of arguments you want. And so you can easily write a resolver that says, I want, all users with an average score above 5.
Right. But where that could be passed in as a parameter to the query?
Where the operation itself could be passed in? Yeah, you could do that as an argument, like have, a convention where,
so it's more open-ended than a standardized or even a convention.
Yeah, the standard doesn't really have an opinion about it. It's up to you to how you want to build that stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just a function with keyword arguments. That's it.
Okay.
But it's pretty loose, and as we'll see with resolvers here, you've got a lot of latitude with what you can do, and you can do pretty much anything you can do in Elixir.
So thinking about how I did this with the Java parser is like the operations you'd use enum and define the allowed operations.
Mm-hmm.
And then that would be one of the fields that they could put in the operation and then the value after. And so it kind of looks like you're doing greater than some value, but it's really two arguments. One's the operation, one's the operand.
Yeah, okay. It works.
So these are the resolvers that we're using within accounts. Create user is a good example of where you can how you can implement things in different ways. Originally, this is what that looked like before I started getting into why, I just wanted to be able to create a user and I didn't have anything that says I could find a seed file. Anyway, basically it's just looking, if you try to remember that the create user mutation was that was back in schema. Yeah, so down here in our mutations, create user takes 3 arguments, all of which have to be present. And then we specify the resolver is resolvers accounts create user. Right. So the way these three arguments work is parent is whatever the parent value is. So if we've got a nested field, like say users and then posts underneath that, parent would be the user and posts, in the post resolver. So you can look back at like where you are in the query.
And is that how it looks as the result, like map that gets spit out, or if like you're hitting the ecto, that parent would be the ecto struct. So it's like more the internal representation of
whatever the resolver previously returned. So
Okay.
if you return structs, ecto schemas, that's what you'll get in the parent for the next level resolvers.
How do you normally do it? Do you resolve directly to the map that you'd render back, or do you?
It just kind of depends. A lot of times I'll do that. Like today I wrote one that was actually backed by a SQL view. And so I wrote a read-only ecto schema that, put it into a schema. And the reason I did it that way is because it actually was in one of those weird contexts where you have to tie together two other unrelated contexts. And so it's just a collaboration between those things. Mm-hmm. And I just hand that back because it pretty much gives me all the stuff I want to do with it. And then I've got a custom type, not a scalar, but I've set up a type for that thing that also points out to the other two objects that it comes from. And so, I'm writing a batch resolver that lets me get all of those and then fetch the other objects as necessary all at once. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So when you resolve, is there like a view layer that takes the struct but then renders it into the correct Absinthe type, or is there like a?
Yes.
Okay.
So the last step in resolving all this stuff is Absinthe is going to purge fields which were not requested. So if I only ask for ID and the schema comes back with an ID and a name, it's going to remove name from the document before it sends it back down the wire. Obviously, if you've got a really expensive thing to request, it's helpful to not get it back in the first place. So you wouldn't want to return like 10 megabytes worth of map stuff if you're asking for is an ID.
So when you're using like an ecto struct to back it, does Absinthe just know I'm going to map whatever the field is directly to the field name in the GraphQL type?
So if you on the GraphQL type, if you specify it's a list, GraphQL is going to, or Absinthe is going to expect a list back. If you specify an object, it's going to be looking for a map.
Okay.
It doesn't like keyword lists.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean it's going to then take that, stringify the keys, send it back down the wire, kind of do some normalization of the data access. And that's pretty much it. I found it to be better than what Poison does for you in normal controllers. If you try to derive a protocol for an object in Poison, half the time, for me, it always. For my JSON API library, I derive them specifically to take out the nils because, like, at least for JSON API, like, you're not supposed to send nils. You're just supposed to not send the keys. So you can send nils in GraphQL, but Poison always blew up for me on what was it? Nils, but it was.
Well, it would probably try to send over the meta keys and the struct key unless you told it. Well, I guess not struct.
Stuff like tuples, right? Like where,
oh yeah, you're right. Tuples do not work.
Yeah, that's asinine. Just make a list of it. That's all it is. But anyway.
And for the other key for resolution, so you said there's async stuff. So what is guaranteed to be in resolution? Is it like based on the order that you declare the fields?
Yeah.
Or what will be okay?
Yeah. I think that's specified in spec. Just that resolution happens top to bottom. Queries can be resolved asynchronously. The return order now is not specified, right? So there's no guarantee about where, because JSON objects are explicitly not ordered, right? So the data coming back is not going to be in any particular order. However, queries can be resolved asynchronously, and mutations are guaranteed to be resolved in order, top to bottom. Make sense?
So if you do a batch of queries, you said the order isn't guaranteed, so how do you correlate that this query goes with this one if there's not enough data in the return type? You just have to make sure that you return enough data to correlate the queries.
I don't understand the question.
So so GraphQL allows batching. So if you have two queries and like you send an ID, but the return value doesn't give you the ID back. You know, so say it's not an ID, it's some other key to look it up.
Oh, no, sorry, you're misunderstanding. I'm not explaining it well. Batching is something provided by Absinthe. So it's synchronously going to still return the document.
Okay.
Right? Batching refers to the efficiency with which it resolves the different levels of that document. Right? So it's batching within this one request. The request is still open. And it can go, when we talk about like the async middleware, that's still all happening in the context of a synchronous web request. So the async is happening within the processing of that document. The mutation stuff that happens synchronously, yeah, that stuff all happens synchronously. But from the client's perspective, that stuff all happened at once. It's like, you know, it doesn't really know whether it happened once or async, right? From the client side, the only way to get async support is over the use of subscriptions.
Okay.
So those definitely happen async. I don't know if even that's specified in the spec, to be honest with you. I think there may be a way to get subscriptions over a polling mechanism. I mean, I know you can use sockets long poll, so I guess that would be kind of poll for subscription stuff. But the client interface, it still goes async. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions like that? All right. So here we're looking at what resolvers look like, and every field has in a document has a resolver. The default resolver is just a map.get or a node.add out of a list type. But you can tell for any field you can say resolve it this way, or use this function to resolve it. And there's two versions of resolvers. There's a 3-parameter and a 2-parameter, or 3-argument, 2-argument version. The 2-argument version leaves off the parent out of that's been resolved so far. Out of habit, I always use the 3-argument version because most of the time I go back at some point and I want to have that argument anyway, and I just don't want to have to do fiddling because you have to change it in both the schema and in your implementation of the resolver. So better just do it all the same way every time. So you got the parent, you've got your arguments that were supplied by the query. Those come in on the variables thing. And then the third parameter is the resolution. So that's got all this extra crap. It's got blueprint for your schema. It's got the requested, an ASTF document that was requested. It's got the context, which is something you can stick stuff into with like a plug. So we've got a plug in this case. Looking at it earlier, I can't remember the name of the context. All right, so this is just a plug that adds stuff to the context. In this case, it's just looking for any bearer token. It doesn't really matter what's in it, and adds admin to the user if it's the first user in the system. So you can make these as complicated as you want to. I usually just have a JWT token in the header and fish out the user from that. Let's see.
You said blueprint. What's a blueprint?
It's a good question. The blueprint is, the term is meaningful within Absinthe. I don't know exactly what all is specified in the blueprint, but I think it's basically an AST of your schema.
Okay.
All the different stuff that is possible. It may also be synonymous with the query under resolution.
So
but I'm not 100% sure.
Have you ever done anything with the AST?
Not with the blueprint. You can get, I've never had occasion to actually look at what's being requested. So you can do something like if you've got a schema with 100 fields in it, and you're really trying to trim down things, you could just say, you could get for the structure under resolution, let's say user, you could get just the fields that are being requested and select only those fields in your Ecto query. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I've never done it. I've never had the occasion to go that focused with it.
Oh, I bet the other reason for it, because this was on one, I don't remember if it was on Elixir Talk or Elixir Outlaws, they were talking about how you can use it to monitor which things are actually being used by clients, because that way you could know it's safe to take away a field and you don't need a version of the API, because you'd be like, no one ever uses this field, and that AST will let you do that because you know it's never actually being asked for.
Yeah, you could do that. That would actually be a good reason to do it. Yeah, a large enough, set of version pool.
Mm-hmm. In their way, when you define your schema to define deprecated fields, so they show up documented as deprecated as well.
Yeah, you can provide a description. You can provide deprecation. I'm not sure what the status of this stuff is, but you can tag fields, I think, in the query with things like @defer to turn it into async. I'm not sure exactly how those are supposed to work, but those query annotations, I think, are something that's under some development.
When you do the deprecate, is it just a docs thing, or does you get the response back, but you also get like a warning block underneath being like, you got deprecations in here.
That's a tooling question. So It's going to fulfill the query, but I think Apollo will spit out a console message or something like that. Which, by the way, if you're on the fence about which toolkit to use, go with Apollo. It's way less frustrating than Relay was with my team.
Relay is supposed to be like high enterprise with lots of customization.
Relay is built for a feed. Like, it uses this cursor mechanism for traversing like lists of things. That's a real pain in the ass to use for anything other than the notion of an infinite list. Relay is something that was built very purposefully for Facebook's use and utility. And I think if your use case fits into that sounds great. Mine never has. So I didn't go that way with it. But not to down the Relay team with them, sure that they spend a lot of time trying to make sure it works really well for their use case. Most people that I've talked to have much preferred Apollo. And they have really good documentation. They have a very active team. It's open source. They're doing a lot of cool stuff there. So my recommendations for Apollo, if you have questions. Anyway.
Does Apollo have direct support for Phoenix clients, or is it like an add-on package you have to add to make it work with the Phoenix WebSockets and channels?
There is an add-on link, I think, what it's called to do Apollo terminology.
Okay.
But yeah, it does all that stuff. There's nothing super complicated about it. But I think there's just a piece of configuration you have to add to where you set up your Apollo store. It's not really a store anymore.
So what have you used on top of Apollo, since that's the part of talking to GraphQL? Like,
I don't use anything on top of Apollo. Apollo in Apollo 2 broke itself up into several different sub-projects. So you could use them more component-oriented fashion. But Apollo provides so I use it with React, and Apollo did a few different ways to kind of wrap React components. So that they'll automatically query for the data that they need. You can specify things like always fetch this data, never use it out of cache, or only use this data out of cache, don't request, or check the cache first, then request it and update the cache with that.
When you used Apollo with React, does the React Apollo side have batching too, where it kind of gathers from the components, I need all these, as opposed to each component? I know sometimes with React, they're do your query as close as possible so you query exactly what you need, but then you need a layer to batch the request so you don't double request a user or a post.
Yeah, it's got deduplication.
Okay.
Queries. They get to add something to it to enable it. I used to anyway. Okay, then turn it on. It may be on by default now. Yeah, it'll batch up the queries, and it'll which is different from the query batching on the Absinthe side. Apollo batching, you can turn that on, embeds multiple query documents into a single request. Most toolkits don't support it. The Apollo GraphQL stack does. I think Absinthe supports it now. It didn't for a long time, but I think that they added that maybe back in the fall. But that's a different form of batching than what we're talking about.
I would assume for that kind of batching, that was kind of I was actually thinking of the first time, is that probably Absinthe doesn't let you see between the query documents because it's, or do you think does Absinthe, would it process them all together at once?
We'll process them serially.
Okay.
If it processes them, if it does a batching, if it supports transport level, it's called transport level batching. And if it supports transport level batching, it's going to build those serially top to bottom.
Okay. Yeah, because that's what I was thinking of, because there's JSON RPC for Ethereum lets you do it, but the big problem is the correlation IDs. Is if at first when you said they came in different orders, I was worried oh, how do I correlate them if they're not in order? But
so if you can do correlated queries like that,
yeah.
What you would need to do is embed one field within another, and then use the parent parameter to figure out what your correlation was. So you could do, let's say I have a mutation where I create a user and then I want to get that user's some automatically created record. Mm-hmm. Say their JWT code or something like that. Then you would write a resolver that specifically it's only useful in this situation. You could use it at the top of the query, but it'll look at the parent, pull the ID out, turn that into a JWT token, and spit it back out as a field. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That's the only way I know of to correlate things without supplying it as a variable, and then using the parameter within your query document.
I assume for the transport batch that there's no support for chaining because it'd be too complex. So it's they're all siblings. You can't be this one happens and you can't get a variable to reuse for the next part, right?
No, but you can have multiple fields within a single query.
Right.
And you could do things that way. You needed to chain things that way. The best way of chaining is just nesting. If you have some field that needs to be chained to the results of some previous query, put it within that query, not as a sibling to it.
Oh, right, because you assume the parent has whatever you wanted as your result, so anything okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. I was thinking about that today, actually. I think in most cases, it's probably a bit of an anti-pattern to intentionally chain mutations that way. If I can chain mutations like create user, then initialize user, I should just initialize the user as part of creating it, right? Or give myself a mutation that does both of the things I need it to do, rather than just do them independently, right? Like it doesn't compose well.
Well, plus you risk not getting any result back at all, because if the final one fails, you don't know that the other one succeeded because you don't get back a result.
You would get data back, and then you would get an error back. Like if you go look at that error we ran into earlier, here we go. It tells you what the path is, right? So that path is a list of keys that is the graph traversal for whatever had an error. So you would get back data that covered most of it. Like I might get create user and then init user. And the init user would be null, but I would still get the user record for the create user.
Oh, okay.
That makes sense?
Mhm.
And that, go ahead.
Sorry. Just finish. I've got a separate question. Just
Okay. The other thing I was going to say was that particular kind of use case where you're like, you take this thing, then you take this other thing based on this other thing. I don't know. I mean, I know it's possible. I feel like it's probably an antidote to do that. It seems like there's some magic involved there, and you could not just shoot your foot off, but that it's probably better to go ahead and create the thing that you need, the result that you need, the mutation you need, that does both of those things rather than expect your client to compose them in that way.
Right. Okay.
Basically,
so my question was, if you do a mutation, you can ask for data back, like the ID in the example you gave before, like make a user get the ID back. I was just thinking of a use case where I have a mutation that has side effects on other objects. So for example, my company does swim team software. I input a time for one swimmer in a race, and that can affect the points and placing of other swimmers.
Sure,
right?
sure.
So it would be pretty handy for me to be able to say, this swimmer in lane 2, their time is X, and pass back, okay, well, here's the rankings of everybody
That's
else.
a subscription.
Okay.
And some of this gets into the nuances of Apollo.
Right.
But what you could do, so first you would set up, like I'll show you the way, I didn't actually get this working before this, but running into some, what is almost certainly an obvious error on my part that I just grabbed out for anger. But setting up the subscription down here, I've got this field, new post.
Mm-hmm.
Its type is a post, right? So if you had a field of like updated scores and a single score type, then this trigger function down here says whenever I receive this create post mutation, I'm going to trigger this subscription. And then it figures out what the topic is. It's going to, so the post that comes into this anonymous function here. So that guy is the result of create post. All right. So now I can use that to create my topic, which is going to mean only people listening for it. Usually you do something like post : ID.
Right.
Right. And so only people listening to post : 1, 2, 3 are going to get that subscription update.
Right. In my world, it'd probably be a level higher. Like it'd be like the event that someone's interested in. Where the
I mean, you can decide
with
whatever data is relevant to you. But Apollo does this other cool thing with its caching system. So you can, when you are setting up the integration, you have the ability to say like, how is a type name resolved? And within all this stuff, you're usually going to see So Apollo adds this for you when you're submitting queries with that. And GraphQL doesn't do it, but it is available to you. It's this little hidden field type name. And so you can tell Apollo when you're coming up with hash keys, use type name plus ID, right? So if you have a score that's got, I don't know if you're updating scores in place or times or whatever, you can tie that back into the cache somehow. So when the new score gets posted or the new place, I'm not sure what this looks like for you, but when the new one comes in, it's going to get added into the cache or update the cache for that object. So if I've already received that time,
Right.
then it's going to, everything that depends on it is going to get an updated version of it when the new one comes in for the subscription.
Right.
Does that make sense? Even if it's coming in on like a new post field or a new swim time field,
Right.
it's gonna, because its type is actually a time or
Right.
place, whatever. And so the stuff that depends on that, now that gets dicey when you've got new data, because queries that would include that new data don't already have a reference to it.
Right.
So in that case, you have to refetch the query. Or you can add it, you have a ton of control over Apollo, so you can actually add it back into the cache for that query. You can look up like what are the dependent queries.
Yeah. I mean, I have a JSON API for this right now, and I just end up including the data that got updated back. And I'm using Ember, and so basically, if I return a bunch of types and IDs, it just updates the store with whatever I send back. So on the server, I can decide intelligently, like, this stuff got updated, I'm just going to give it to you, and whether you ask for it or not, and then it just updates its cache.
So you can also trigger out-of-band subscription updates. Like if you're doing something else that's not connected to mutations, you can just do like absinthe.subscription.publish and tell it, the type and the topic name, and then it will send down whatever document you want.
Right.
And then convert it to the right format for the subscription.
Right.
Because remember, you can also specify what fields you want on the subscription. If I say I only want the ID, I'm not going to receive the whole object.
Right.
For the subscription. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Good question.
For your projects, how have you connected so you said that you keep Absinthe to the web part. That's what I would do too. But with that, we kind of have a thing of, like, while we're indexing blockchain, we're getting new records. And so like we can't use Phoenix channel broadcast because that'd mean Phoenix would go in the other context where they shouldn't know about Phoenix. So, because we're not multi-node, we're just going to use registry. But is there something you do to like do where I want eventually an Absinthe topic update, but I don't want to use Absinthe in my other apps because I don't want them to know I'm using Absinthe, but I want, like, do you do that sort of thing?
How do I publish
like how do you get the message to the Absinthe layer when you need to do like pub sub from the other layers? So
I usually have a collaboration context.
Okay.
The way I would structure that is to have like a supervised process that is subscribed to something over Phoenix pub sub or whatever your channel is, whatever your message queue is, that's wrapping queue or whatever it is that's fine, and then have it forward the message on to Absinthe. So he knows about Absinthe, but the application, the Erlang application we're talking about is not.
Okay.
That's just the main layer exercise. New layers are easy to create. Just new module. Limit your coupling to something that's either got a couple. Like for me, I always drive that coupling down, never across. They never up, right? So I can have something sitting up at a higher level that refers down to two other things and coordinates between them, but neither of those things is ever going to know about the upstream dependency unless and even then it's a message-based thing, so he might subscribe to pub sub of something else like that, but it's not a type coupling.
Okay.
So most of the time it's just a store forward kind of situation. So pushes other stuff out of subscriptions. Good question. Any others? I think I'm about out of material here. This is not better organized.
I mean, the use case I'm looking at GraphQL for is really more for like to enable almost ad hoc reporting, like to add the way I think about it is adding a UI layer, because there's only a handful of data types, but that where a non-sophisticated user could choose some parameters that would essentially generate a GraphQL query, and then that would, go down and then come back up. And then where I need more flexibility is being able to output that same data in different formats. Like I need like CSV or HTML, PDFs. There's my world, little mailing labels that get put on as stickers on ribbons is a big deal. So I have a lot of different output needs, and I have a lot of users that want to create new reports that, if I could give them a tool where they can make their own reports, it'd be a big win. And so the GraphQL, the fact that it's got this self-documenting discoverability, all that sort of stuff, seems like there's some opportunity to build on that. I couldn't put an end user run a GraphQL, or I'm trying to pronounce it, but it
I've
seems
done that.
Yeah,
Something very similar to that.
an ad hoc reporting type of tool.
Yeah, it's probably not as ad hoc as maybe what you're envisioning, but the principles are essentially the same.
Right.
It works pretty well. It's just a matter of creating. It's really more of a UI exercise than anything else. And as far as different formats, like you can't create those on the client side. What I would do is
it's mostly created on the client side. So
so if you do it on client side, that's great.
Yeah.
What I did for like CSV was create the CSV client side, or rather the list of values, list of lists of values, and then send it back up to the server and round trip it, as a CSV download. Is that mostly as far as Mandy has.
Right.
You can do client-side PDF now.
I do that right now, yeah, to do the mailing labels. So we generate PDFs. I guess it's called JS PDF.
Yeah. I don't know if there's anything else you need to do server side. If you did have a situation where you basically needed to run the same query server side, I would just do what we talked about with REST endpoints, where if you have REST endpoints, where if you need to restify a GraphQL endpoint, call Absinthe directly.
I mean, sometimes people want a PDF version of, like we have pretty intense reports that are like multi-column laid out, all this. That's all HTML, and there's actually quite a bit of client-side intelligence where like to see, will this block fit in a column? No. Make a new page, keep going. So it lays all that stuff out. But for us to make a PDF of that, what I would probably do is fire up a Lambda that runs the Ember app, does all that work, then saves it as a PDF, rather than try to rebuild it some other way. Because all that logic's in Ember.
Yeah.
For some of our stuff, because like getting Node to not like install well and not having to do like a non-bomb, we actually abandoned using Ember Fastboot and instead just boot up literally actually Chrome to do what Fastboot used to do, because we found it to be more reliable. Mind you, that won't work on Lambda.
With the headless Chrome?
Yeah, the new headless Chrome, we found it more reliable. Plus, we know it looks right in Chrome.
Right.
So as opposed to like running it with the Fastboot system where you're not really in any one browser, you're in this other things kind of sort of.
Yeah. I haven't tried it. I mean, so far it's just like, hey, just save it as a PDF and print it. That's been okay. But people they just expect a download button that just doesn't.
For your reporting, I would think it would matter how flexible are they really, because the thing that pops to mind is like, if you actually want full flexibility, you're talking about MDX, which is the standard that Microsoft came up with for OLAP data sources, so that you can very easily do like accounting level reporting, where like, like the high level stuff that SQL supports now, like, partition over a window, like that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And so like people that know how to do that can do that, but I don't know if your end users would ever do it, because like even me thinking about it is complicated.
Yeah.
To get it right.
It's really 3, maybe 4 main data types in my world. There's like you're gonna report on an athlete, or you're gonna report on the results, or like on a team. But then there's also these aggregates of that. And so I think I end up with the sort of detail level object and then separate object for an aggregate. It represents if you're going to do, you know, who are the top times of the meet, or what's the total points across. Anyway, I don't want to.
Yeah, you can aggregate objects, and you can also have you get like, you know, across meets for a given athlete, you would have a field that's like an aggregate over all that athlete's meets. And I think that's how you would do it, because it can't be as flexible as it could be, because otherwise you're just having them know a really indirect version of SQL. Plus, there's not going to be any library to auto-translate all the aggregates to the active query. So like you still have to know how to kind of by hand make each of those fields into active queries.
Right. I don't know. Are you guys familiar with Track? It's a pretty old Python system that was built. Like you had Subversion. It's back pre-Git, so you had like Subversion. Track was like a layer on top of that. They had a really nice query interface that lets you do these ad hoc things. That essentially was just a thin layer on top of SQL. So you could specify what fields you wanted. You had to specify a data type. So you imagine it's a SQL where you're limited to one table. That's all you can do is one table. But you can do aggregates on that one table. You can do group bys. You can, you know, do conditions and pick what fields you want. But with that, you can actually do quite a bit of stuff. And so Track's world, it was like tickets, you know, issues. And you can do all kinds of stuff with issues. But that you're pretty much limited to that domain.
If you really want to, you could take the keyword syntax that Ecto supports and turn that into a field. But I don't think you want to support it. Because like you could have a field where like it has group by, because it would look the same as the from call in Ecto then. I mean, you could repeat keys though, because the way GraphQL works, right? You can't repeat argument keys to one field, can you?
One field? No.
Yeah. So you couldn't do that part where you like have more than one.
Just to be clear, I'm not trying to present a thing where any end user types anything.
Oh, okay.
So they're not typing a query at all. They would just be picking from dropdowns. So that's exactly what Track did before. You got a list of these fields are available, you can pick up.
Yeah,
and then you can
mine, I had it broken out into like data, filters, data sources, and some other category of things. They basically would just check off which fields they wanted to see, which kind of big filters they wanted to use.
Yeah.
What data sources they wanted to pull from. Then it would glom all that up into.
Yeah, I think this would be simpler than that, because I would the first choice would be what kind of data do you want? Pick that, and then from there the world's much smaller. There's only certain fields that are available. You think about it just like you're in one table. What can you do with one table?
Yeah.
And I don't know. It's probably, I know it's more complicated than that, but that's what I was looking at.
Yeah. Well, if you want to, I mean, grab it for a second.
Sure.
I get it in 6 months. So it's working on this. But any other questions or anything?
The GraphQL route that we open from either from Phoenix framework or either from an Apollo, is it with only one API, which is GraphQL, and then you send a post or a GET request to that, or?
Yeah, you can actually use as many as you wanted to in there. These are just forwards in the Phoenix router. But you can get as complicated, do whatever you would normally have access to in any other plug. You can specify to use get or put or patch or whatever you want.
What is the default that takes, like, is it both get and post together, or is it only just the post by default? Or it's up to you on how you set it.
By default, it's just post.
Oh, post. Okay.
Yeah. I think I'm not sure what the way to modify it is off the top of my head. I've never had to do it.
Okay.
I know that I've seen the parameters for it.
Okay.
So it's probably something like the method. Yeah.
Okay.
Something along those lines.
So you can differentiate the complicated, the longer query strings as a separate calls for that, and then you can route those values apart from the default route.
Well, no, and you can have a separate GraphQL endpoint.
Okay.
You could write a plug that made those kind of decisions
Uh-huh.
and routed, some things to this GraphQL endpoint or some things to that one. You could set up, independent routes where one endpoint used get and one endpoint used put, post. Again, I think doing anything like this over get is an anti-pattern.
Mm.
Post is really the method that is meant for this kind of thing. It's going to have the same semantics as what you actually want.
Okay.
In GraphQL.
What would you suggest, like a best practice, like go with one route or have multiple routes, or it all depends on what kind of requirement you have?
It's good. I mean, it always depends on your requirements. But I think in general, your most of the situations I've seen have been well served by a single endpoint.
Okay.
Again, schema stitching is something that's on the near horizon for a lot of GraphQL toolkits.
Okay.
And that will do mostly what you're talking about, of composing multiple endpoints into a single exposed endpoint. From a client's perspective, you really want to have one exposed endpoint, but that may be delegated to multiple independent backends.
Oh, you can enable even authentication?
One more time?
The authentication for the GraphQL, can you do that?
Yes, that's over here in the, that's done in this context thing. They've got a very simple notion of authentication here. And it basically comes down to if you supply me a bearer token, which is right here, then it says, okay, you're good. The current user is, whomever. And the authorization just plucks the first user out of the list of users, the database, says they're an admin, and then returns it. Obviously, that's not sufficient for a normal authentication or authorization scheme.
You can enable it. I mean, again, you can enable something like a JWT as well.
Yep.
But that's nothing about GraphQL. So that's just something that Phoenix does with the route. So like that file that he's talking about on the side there,
Right.
if you look on line 6, that's where it's plugged in.
Okay.
So that says pipeline API. So then on line 10, where it says pipe through API, so /API has to go through both, it accepts JSON and it passes through context.
Okay.
So the context did send back an error, did plug halt.
Mm-hmm.
That would say stop this pipeline, don't go any farther, there's been an error. And it would never actually get to Absinthe to do the work. So the authorization layer is something that plug is doing. It's not an Absinthe thing, it's not a GraphQL thing.
Okay. So you can still do it with a basic web, I mean like an Nginx basic authentication as well, and then you can route your APIs. That
Yeah, you can do that. One thing I'll add to what Luke was saying though is that this actually does interact with Absinthe, in that you're storing the current user into the context, and that lets your resolvers know who the current user is. I mean, that's a really common scenario to need to know who is the logged in user.
so Absinthe will have, for every request, it knows who is requesting for you and what is its TTL to end up at what time. So Absinthe knows that kind of a session of who this user is and why he's requesting.
You have to tell it, yeah.
Tell it.
Yeah, that's what this context does. Is it's building up, the current user. Like you can see here where it's called put private, in the private storage of the connection, the Absinthe key.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, within this context.
By convention in plug, where you do put private on the connection, that's usually the name of the library. So Absinthe is using the Absinthe key for the private data that it uses internally. And that's so that it doesn't clash with the assigns, which are like the variables that your normal Phoenix controllers would see. And so put private is there. Absinthe knows to look in there, and that's why it's magically there during the resolution. Because Absinthe knows to pull it out of the put private in the con. Because by the time you get to the resolvers, you don't have a count anymore. You're in like Absinthe land.
Oh, okay.
You don't have the plug count anymore. So like this is that bridge to allow the Absinthe stuff that doesn't let you see the plug con
Okay.
to still see the data that you got from the plug con in the beginning of the pipeline.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I think in the newer versions, I'm not sure how up to date this tutorial was. I'm not going to grab the source, but I think Absinthe actually has some functions for sticking stuff into the context to kind of abstract away like what key it's supposed to be under.
Yeah, because realistically, you're not supposed to know that the Absinthe, like you're not supposed to put private key. The libraries are supposed to give things to Rapid.
So I think that there are functions that do that. I'm not sure why this. I think this might be old code from early on.
Maybe one last question though.
Yeah.
So, do you have a real use case that you really think GraphQL is used in?
There's no situation where I'd use Rust voluntarily. I would use GraphQL for any semi-complicated, rich interaction with the server.
Okay.
Like, I mean, I was a skeptic for a long time, but honestly, man, having used this in about 5 projects now, like significant projects, there's no situation where I go back to using Rust without a really good reason for it.
Okay. So, I mean, in the real world, you see that, I mean, if you have like, if you want to talk to a lot of REST APIs, then your decision of starting a project would be using a GraphQL server and run it. And then, okay.
I would still integrate using GraphQL, calling out to REST APIs. You can actually see, because you can start taking advantage of things like caching on the server.
Okay.
You can actually see major performance benefits. There was a case study somebody did a while back where they just introduced a GraphQL proxy to a bunch of internal services that gave them like a 5-fold increase in speed purely from getting rid of latency. So they were able to make all these requests very quickly within their server's infrastructure, within their network infrastructure, with low latency stuff, and return it all at once rather than making 5 to 10 to 20 API requests against the different REST endpoints, each of which has tons of latency along the way.
Right.
Even if you do nothing but proxy to a REST endpoint, it's still a win.
Okay.
And if you're using it, to the fullest extent of what's capable, you can really see some dramatic benefits from it. Again, that's just me. I tend to, have strong opinions, weakly held kind of thing, but it would take a lot for me to say like, yep, I think REST is the right call here.
Okay.
I tend to think that mostly what it has to do with is organizational inertia. So if I were put in charge of a team where I was dealing with a lot of like developers very stuck in their ways, and we had a ton of tooling built up around REST endpoints and that kind of stuff, and there was just no real will to introduce anything new, like I'd suck it up and deal with it. But honestly, like the number of decisions that get streamlined because you're using GraphQL is huge. You don't have to start coming up with resource patterns for your URLs and figuring out all that stuff. Not everything is getting the same. I mean, since everything's on the same endpoint, you don't have to come up with wrappers for every nested resource.
Right.
There's a lot of benefits from it. I'm not going to say that it's perfect for every single use case out there, but it's perfect for a lot of them.
So I would say in comparison, like even compared to JSON API, which would be the other one that's structured, like never do just JSON, because you're going to have to figure out how do I do includes and how do I do lists. So JSON API is more structured, but GraphQL has Graphable. So like it has a really easy way to try it out, and it has the integrated docs. While when we do, like Docker does Ember front end, so we do mostly JSON API on the back end, but there's still a thing of like, we then have to use Swagger to document the API.
Okay.
So that's extra work. It doesn't just happen the way it works. Like the only thing Keith had to do to make the docs was add the at description or at desk tag at the top.
Yeah.
All the other things about like the field type was just auto-generated because otherwise it wouldn't work. And so I think that's nice where the same way that JSON API is better than just normal JSON because it's like, this is how we do includes, this is how we structure data, this is how we structure lists. GraphQL has that on top of like, this is how we structure the docs and you have to give us types. Because you really do want the types because otherwise you end up getting like messy types where sometimes it's one type and sometimes the other. And like, yeah, we have very flexible languages, but it also leads to weird bugs when it's not, when the format's not strictly typed.
So you think that instead of using a Swagger like a doc, which you generally use for REST API, then you go with what this GraphQL editor itself have it, where you have all your queries in it.
Yeah, because so Swagger is helpful not because it generates docs, but because it generates interactive docs.
Okay.
It generates, there's a standard Swagger UI that introspects it and spits out, like, for each endpoint, here's the thing, here's the format we want. But with that, you're still, when you're maintaining it, specifying by hand all those types. While on with Absinthe GraphQL, like, in order for it to work, you had to specify those types. They're not independent, so you don't have to worry about drift. While with like Swagger, you have to worry about drift of like, it's another documentation that isn't actually checked.
Right.
Like the only way to check it is to go through the Swagger UI and try it out and see that it blows up. Like there's not a good way to check it. While like with GraphQL, it'll just be checked because GraphQL will blow up when you try to click through.
But Swagger gives you a model definition, right? So how does a person who is pretty new to a GraphQL API knows that this is the definition that I should use to retrieve the data?
GraphQL has the same thing that Swagger does, where you can auto-generate clients if you want.
Oh, okay.
I mean, we just use GraphQL because it's super easy to demonstrate, but there are tools to, like the same way that Swagger has to like give me a client. I would say the thing you want to be careful with is that you may want to generate it all, but you still want to be selective in the fields you get, because like the benefit of GraphQL is the client selects only the fields it needs. So you don't want to go the way of like, I generate a client that gets me all the fields and I use 2 of them, because you're asking for extra data. The server can't know that you're not using those fields.
Right.
And so like usually JSON API is opt out. Like you have to say fields and say the fields to not get all the fields.
Right.
But GraphQL, because it's emphasizing like an evolution of the API, you have to opt in. So that means overall your ecosystem is going to be more efficient on the wire because they have to say, I want this field. And it's something obviously you have to enforce, because you have to make sure that the first time they don't just, like you said, spit out the schema and I'm going to grab all the fields that currently exist right now.
Right. Yeah.
You want to make sure that you're grabbing just the fields you need in just the way you need it, because then you're not throwing out fields, you're not passing them over the wire when you don't need them. And then you can use the server and like the AST to monitor, I've never used this field. It's safe to get rid of it. Like say when you're doing this integration over your specific use case, it turns out that this field that you thought you couldn't get rid of, you can, because once everyone passes through the GraphQL that's doing the schema stitching, you find out no one ever uses this legacy field that we're too afraid to get rid of. And you could monitor that if you make sure that no one grabs the field if they don't actually need it.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I've never seen like a client generated for you by GraphQL. I suppose it's possible to create a wrapper that does stuff.
I think it's more important for typed languages where you can get them generated, because they would need to define all the classes to unpack. Because if you look at the way that the JSON parsing libraries work in Java, even JSON, the Google one, where it kind of does this weird thing with generics to like infer the types, you still have to be exactly explicit what the types are. There's no like, I might be a number or I might be a quoted number in the type languages.
Like type script or camel script or something like that. You need to, that makes sense. One thing I'll say is that the IDE does a pretty good job of like prompting you for like, here's the possibilities you could be asking for. And then once you get used to reading the documentation, it's really easy to know like, what am I allowed to do with this thing? If I get to a post, I know that I can request the author, and then from that I can get to all these other fields from that. You just gotta get good at navigating the schema from the documentation. It's pretty straightforward and usually provides plenty of documentation.
I'm still trying to look out the view that you got on the top because I was going to your first question that you asked. I just only see the GraphQL, the play button, and that header, but I don't see the top querying things. In general.
Like all this stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's I'm using Absinthe 1.4, and this is just what the default graphical.
So Apollo server doesn't even have that kind of a view that you're showing.
I would check the version of the graphical package you're using because this is from Apollo.
Oh, so the new version have the.
So I think you just might be using an old version.
Oh yeah.
So check the versions, maybe update it. But today's version, you should have some kind of an option to get that stuff.
It doesn't have anything like role-based or stuff like you are like an admin to this particular site. It doesn't show you the whole one. It doesn't do that, right? It's for everyone the same view.
Yeah, providing using the same version of the graphical package. Yeah. I mean, now you don't normally expose this to users.
Oh,
like this is just an ad. This is just a dev tool.
Okay.
There's no way in hell I would put this on my production server. Like that's just asking for trouble.
Oh, okay.
Your UI should wrap this stuff up into. If you look at the Apollo client docs, like how to use it with React or with Angular or something like that. It's just basically like client dot what the method is, but GQL and then the query and the variables. There's a bunch of options in client SDK for it.
I think the one which we are using is on a production, and we have this editor open. So.
Well, right, but is it production where only devs are touching it or your end users? Because it might be that's the easiest way. If you integrate a bunch of other systems, this might be the only way to view and explore the data.
Sure. I mean, if you're making tools for developers or somebody who's fairly technical.
No, the peers which they use in like a Power BI, they try to show that this is something that we have got, which fetch the data across all your ticketing systems, and then so they started giving us the URLs and okay, you query it and you get everything with the ticketing system. So they gave this URL for us on the editor, and then when we started integrating it in the Power BI source, it started giving us a weird response back saying that it's a uncompatible data that we're getting. But now I see that the way that we are doing is a get request, but I should start doing it as a post request with the payload of the query. And then
that's very possible. You maybe you tried it as a post.
And make sure you actually get the equivalent of your /API, because like this view is /API/graphical, while the API that you're hitting during the queries is just /API.
Yeah, but the one that I saw is like on the query string with query string on the URL. It's one single string with everything added. So you have all that brackets and all stuff.
Yeah, that makes sense. But we'll check your meta type.
Oh yeah, sure, yeah.
I'm honestly not that familiar with the Apollo's JavaScript server.
Oh, okay.
The Node server. I don't really do Node stuff with it.
So you still recommend Absinthe a good starter for like if you want to integrate at a.
If you speak Elixir, yeah, I recommend.
Oh, okay.
If you kind of deal with these kinds of questions.
Oh, yeah.
If you're doing it in the context of Elixir, definitely Absinthe is the way to go.
Okay.
If you are not interested in using Elixir, I think you're wrong. But use whatever languages the toolkit is available in your language.
Okay.
I know the tools in Node are top notch for these things. I just think Elixir is a better platform to build on.
Right.
So if you want to do the async queries where like you're going to hit each of the ticketing systems simultaneously with async queries for each field, that's easier in Elixir because Elixir has better support for concurrency. I mean, Node, remember, is JavaScript, so
True.
it has no threads.
True.
So it can't do CPU level concurrency.
Correct.
What it does do is normally the Node server's like four processes, so it counts the number of logical cores you have and it has OS processes.
Right.
While Elixir has one scheduler thread in the same OS process, and that is like doing the work stealing algorithm of like, here's all the internal to that VM processes that you want to do. And so it's much easier to use as much of your CPU as possible. Like the project I'm working on for my current client, my laptop constantly sounds like a jet because I am using all the cores all the time, most efficiently, because I can do so many things concurrently in one OS process. Because I can do so many things concurrently in one OS process.
Okay.
You know,
Yeah,
to the
what
level
is-
of like
what
I'm
number
knocking
did-
Rust servers over.
You get one scheduler per core.
Well, per logical core for hyperthreading.
Yeah, per logical core, by default. And like Beam takes care of all that for you. You don't have to deal with that stuff.
There was a weird, that weird discussion that we had when we thought, it was a decision that we want to use Elixir, and then we eventually landed up in Node.js saying that the team doesn't have an exposure to Elixir, so you better not to.
I know, if your team has a certain level of confidence, I think that's a weakness to you. I've taught teams Elixir. You can learn the essentials pretty quickly.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, if your team's worried, I'm pretty sure you can hire him and you can hire Dockyard to help your team. Like either one works.
Yeah, I mean, I'm coaching a team right now that picked it up 6 months ago, and they ripped out their first version of a rewrite in a couple of weeks. And they've been building on it since then, obviously, but it's not rocket science. Like if you can,
We have a pretty good
community at
use.
large is just in this place where it's easier. It's hard to hire somebody with a lot of Elixir experience. It's easy to hire somebody who wants to learn Elixir, and that's a more important thing, is to find a competent developer who wants to learn it.
True.
Just saying like, well, we don't have experience with it is a fairly weak excuse.
Mm.
That's something that you can have.
Because we have a use case which takes around like 300 sites and 10,000 servers across, which you constantly get the data and then feed log to it, which needs a lot of data crunching and then keeping it in the database and retrieving the servers, hitting back to your front end. So it's a lot of server driven with the data center. So when we suggested them with Elixir, they said our team doesn't have an Elixir exposure, so let's stay with Node, and then when we go to some point of a stable position, then we can think about moving to Elixir.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't do number crunching in Elixir. I wouldn't do it in Node either. But I would use it as a control plane.
Oh, okay.
Like as you're kind of collecting up data.
Right.
Makes a good spot for that. Like you got to do actual, like trying to use CUDA libraries or something like that. I would probably farm that out to it.
So my backend plane is hitting up with Go. Backend plane is hitting up with Go, which Go is trying to get all the data and feeding back to the database. From the database, reading it, I'm using now as a Node.js to get the data and show it to the UI. So maybe that doesn't fit Elixir to do a lot more at a CPU level, because Go is already doing that, right? Which is trying to get it. So that might be another reason why you're not. I mean, might be like why you're using two functional programming languages instead. Node can do what you want.
What do you mean by number crunching? Like just addition?
10,000 servers?
Oh yeah, so the point is, if you want to, so there will be a data center which it wants to boot up a lot of servers and then see what is there inside and get the data and then store it and then show it that, okay, we ran these scripts and then we're all good. So that for a bigger site, which have around 500 servers, have to go and get back the data and then store it in the database and trigger back onto the UI.
So I would say that's not number crunching. That sounds like you're IO bound. And so for that case, if you need to connect to hundreds or thousands, early, like the Beam is much better at that. Like the thing with WhatsApp is one server, yes, a shit ton of memory, a shit ton of cores, but they ran out of ports and the number of NIC cards they could put on the machine. There was no problem with Erlang hitting that. And so it's much easier to have lots of connections that are all live, all waiting for data from all of those hundreds of servers in Elixir or Erlang. It is in probably any other language, because they can all just sit in the background. And the way processes work is if they go to wait on IO, they're not eating up resources. The schedulers aren't looking, they're just waiting for the IO to come back.
Right.
And so it's much easier to do that than to have to write your own solution of writing like callback style, event machine style stuff, which is how Node works under the covers with libuv.
So we can use that as a socket where it can wait until the event has been triggered and we can.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's
That's the forte, right? That's telephone switch.
Oh, yeah.
That's,
I mean-
that's what the history of Erlang is.
That's also why, like, just like how Rails, the example is here's how to write a blog. The example for Phoenix is how to write a chat server. And then our example of how well it scales is this is how to write a chat server that has 2 million clients that can all send messages to each other, and you see the response in under a second. Like, this is that thing. From what you describe, it seems like your problem more is like talking to all the machines and waiting for the response more than the number crunching. We're talking number crunching. It's like stuff where you're doing complex math where you
Matrix multiplication.
No.
So, yeah,
It's the data retrieval.
No,
It sounds like a queuing problem, like all the servers would write to some queue,
True.
and then other things would pick up data from the queuing process.
True, yeah.
It sounds more like a Kafka.
So we will be using
mode.
Okay.
We've been using the channels in Go. We've been using channels in Go where we just wait until we get the data from the backend